Welcome to Raphael's Refuge. Do come in. Please sign our guest book. And let me give you a brochure. It explains what we're about. And also want to give you a prayer card. We're here for babies who have died from miscarriage, from abortion, from stillbirth, or from infant death. So that would be up to 12 months. And the way that we represent these children is with the glass block. If you come over here, you see there's a name and a date. That's all we put, is the name and the date of the baby. This person had lost 5. She'd had 5 miscarriages. So that's what all of these are. These walls are all finished. We still have room on those 2 walls, and we have some room on those 2 walls. And then once those are filled in, the sidewalks you saw, it looks like sidewalks, strange sidewalks coming in, those will have long walls of glass blocks with baby's name on them. So eventually there'll be thousands of glass blocks out here for the babies. This is we call it our pool of mercy, so that if somebody has been involved with abortion in any way and they can't let go of the guilt and the shame, if they want to walk through water and feel a tangible cleansing, like in a Jewish mikveh, they can. Nobody has to. It's just available if they want to. Then if you come on in, I'll tell you about our mural. That represents the Archangel Raphael. We learn about him in the book of Tobit in the Old Testament. There was a man and a woman and their son, and a bird pooped in his eye, the man's eye, and he became blind. So he was needing to send his son to Medea so that he could get his money. His cousin had his money in Medea. And lo and behold, this man shows up at the door and introduces himself as a relative. And so the father asks the man if the man offered, he would be a guide to take him to Medea to get his money. And so the son went along with the angel, and as they were walking along the Tigris River, a fish leaped out the water, grabbed the young man's ankle, scared him silly, and the guide said, "Oh, don't worry, just pull him out of the water, take the heart, the gall, and the liver, and continue on your journey to Medea." And so that's what happened. And then they were in Medea for a long time, and he got married there, and then eventually comes back, and one of those heart, gall, or liver was applied to the father's eyes, and he regained his sight. So all was well, and it all ended up quite happily. And after they had gotten back, the guide introduces himself as the angel Raphael.
Which means God heals, or God has healed.
Some people think that the baby, he's just holding the baby, not because it's the baby Jesus, which some people assume, but just representing a baby that has been lost, that has passed. This is a Jewish prayer shawl, but initially it was just part of his garment. A friend from Austin was out here, and she said, "Oh, I see you have a Jewish prayer shawl." I said, "No, I don't." I got a little indignant about it because it's like, I'm painting this. But she said, "No, that's a Jewish prayer shawl. It's white and it's blue." So I called up the architect, and he said, "Oh, that's a wonderful idea." So I ended up painting the blue, and the white, and then we had a Jewish prayer shawl. But then I got kind of afraid because I seldom paint, and it's like, well, I was going to have to paint fluffy tassels because I knew prayer shawls had tassels. And I was worried about how am I going to make it look fluffy on this hard surface. Mentioned that to a Messianic Jew, and he said, "Oh, you don't put fluffy curtain tassels. You take 4 long cards of white and 1 longer card of blue, and you come down and you wrap it over once, and then as you come down here, you make a knot. You count the number of times you knot it, and then you count these, and each one of these you keep counting. In the back, we have the exact numbers, and when you add it all up, you've got the commandments." And I said, "Oh, the 10 Commandments." And he says, no, this is Old Testament time. There's 613 commandments. So that's what all of this represents. Each one represents those commandments. Then that takes us down to the fish. The reason we have a fish there is, again, from the book of Tobit, and the fish had leapt out the water and grabbed the young man's ankle. Well, when I first drew the sketch for this, you can see I had this nice little fish. And I would just kind of feel like inside, not in my ears, but inside, that if I was wrong and if that was not the right fish, someday a young man or young men were going to be looking at that. They would discount the whole scriptures because they knew that that little fish wasn't going to jump out the water and scare anybody. So eventually I ended up going online and looking up the fish in the Tigris River. It said that the bull shark is native to the Tigris River. It listed all the fish in the Tigris River. Okay, so I only had to go whipping down there. There was only 2 big fish in the Tigris River. One was a bull shark and one was a catfish. It's like, well, I know a catfish isn't going to go leaping up and biting anybody. So it had to have been a bull shark. So that presented a problem to me because I had already started painting, not that fish, but because I knew it wasn't big enough, but I had this beautiful fish leaping out of the water, and I was very proud of it, which is my downfall. I didn't want to have to erase that fish I was painting. But eventually, I went to church. In Praha, I was going to go to Mass. Father always had a Mass on every morning. So there I am at Mass early in the morning. There's no Mass. There's no people. Well, that tells me it was the first Friday, because on first Friday he had Mass in the evening. So I thought, well, I had a bad attitude. I'm already here. I might as well just sit down and say some prayers. As soon as I touched the pew, inside, I heard, "You stubborn woman, I even led you to that website." And I thought, okay. So I had to come home and paint over my beautiful fish, and now we have a bull shark. Now, I was very worried about that. I didn't like the idea because I was afraid it'd be scary. But I found that picture online, National Geographic, and if you look at it, it looks like it's even smiling. So that's how we end up with the bull shark down there. Then the other thing I wanted to show you is, and this wasn't planned at all, but there are times when the light comes down from way up there. If you stand behind here and look up there, you can see how the light comes through. And so one day I was busy, and I was rushing back here, and I was rushing back out the door, and for some reason, I turned around and looked, and the sun was right on the face of the angel. And then as it came down, slowly, it landed right on the baby in his arm. And then it slowly went on out. Another time, I came home from church, and I don't normally come out here after I go to Mass, but I did that day, and the sun came down, and it landed right in between the scrolls. It was as if I had purposely measured this all out and planned it, but I hadn't. And it was right there. I've got a photograph of it. And as it left, the sun always comes down and to the right. So the last thing that was lit up was, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." That was from Mark 10:14. But then, as exciting as those sun events were, the one that touched my heart the most was when it came down on the dove. Again, I had no earthly idea, because you see all the times before it was lower. But I was out here talking to a dear friend. Her husband was standing about where you're standing, and he said something. Well, we were busy. We ignored him. He patiently stood there and repeated, "There's light on the dove." So we had no idea. We turned around and looked up, and the light was right on the breast of the dove. To me, that was the most beautiful story because the dove represents the Holy Spirit. And to have the sunlight come on the breast of the dove. And if you look at this picture, it looks like there's a blue heart. And there's no heart there. But that's what it looks like. I often point out that these people assume they were painted on, but no, they were cut out of wood. He volunteered first down here to do the name of the archangel. And I thought that was wonderful, but it was such a fancy, there's a little slit in every one of these. There's at least one slit. Usually there's more. This has 3 slits. And his name is Ken Andrews. And he cut all these out using just a scroll saw. And he said the hardest thing there was on cutting these out was the dot of the I on the book of Tobit. He had to maneuver it with his fingers to make it round. And so of all of that, with all of these creases, cuts in here, that was the hardest thing, the dot of the I. This was to represent the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And that's the typical Catholic way of representing the Sacred Heart of Jesus, what's in the circle. Well, I'd been a long time putting off painting up there because I was having hip problems and back problems, and I didn't want to have to go up and down the ladder. And it started happening that in my house, I would open a drawer and there'd be a picture of the Sacred Heart. Or I would open a book that I hadn't touched in forever, and it would open up, there's a holy card to the Sacred Heart. Well, that kept happening, and so it's like, okay, I give. I'll go up there, I'll paint it. But did the Sacred Heart, and that's what I planned on, and that was fine. But then I realized I had a little circle and I had a rectangular space, and so I put red paint on my brush, but I was afraid because if I had touched red on that blue and it wasn't going to work, I'd had to be up and down the ladder. Well, thankfully, I had put a CD on that I hadn't listened to in months. And as I was up there just frozen with paint on the brush, not afraid to touch it, the song kept singing, "Be Not Afraid." And so it's like, okay, so beep, 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 and did this side, and then I did that side, and then eventually the circles. But I didn't know what it was going to look like because I hadn't planned it. So when I came down here, when I finished, I came down here to look up at it, I heard it somehow inside, not in my ears, but somehow that represents the love of God going through the Sacred Heart of Jesus and then spreading out into the whole universe. And that blew my mind because I never thought about God's love permeating our universe. I just had this child's vision of here's the earth and here's heaven and back and forth, angels and saints and Jesus and Mary, whatever. But the universe? And the thought is perfect. But I was completely surprised with it because like I said, I'd never thought about God's love permeating our universe through the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So that's that story. On this side, we've got another one. This was going to be a picture of, in Catholic art, we call it the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And they show the heart, and they usually have a little cross on top of the flame, and they used to have a little ring of pink roses along the heart. And I put the sword through it, and the flame on top. And then I wanted to make the heart look like it had depth to it. I didn't want it to look flat. Because I figured I gotta let that dry. It'll probably take me a couple more times coming out here to make it look like it's got some depth to it. Well, in the meantime, a friend from Austin was out here, and she had been out here praying, and when I came out to show her husband what I was working on, she called out to me and she said, "There's something in the heart." So from here I looked up at it and I said, "A baby?" And she said, "Yes, it looks like the ultrasound of a baby." And that was just there. I was going to come out, like I said, 2 or 3 more times and get it to where it would look rounded or something, but I did go and I touched it with some paint. What I did was to take the feet, they were dangling down and that didn't look nice to me, so I raised the feet, and I'm pretty sure I darkened the line that defined the baby's back, but other than that, I didn't I didn't mean to paint that. It was just there. So When I was telling a visitor, a Deacon Guadalupe from Austin actually, but I didn't like it because babies don't grow in hearts. They grow in wombs. And he says, now I have a story to tell you. He said there's a woman named Martha Robin, R-O-B-I-N, and she's on her way towards sainthood. I'd never heard of her, but apparently she would have visitations from our Blessed Mother. And one day, a woman came to her, to Martha, and asked Martha to ask the Virgin Mary, what happens to babies after they've died? Mary told Martha, I carry them to heaven in my heart. Well, now, I loved it. For a year and a half, it's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's so wonderful to be able to tell a person, especially a woman who has lost a baby, that story. She carries them to heaven in her heart. Then the crown was going to be a rose, because usually with a picture of our Blessed Mother, there are roses. And so I had, on my sketch, put a rose, but I ended up instead a crown, and then the lily. And Mary often is shown with the lily for her purity, but only recently did I realize, well, the lily also can be representative of Saint Joseph, and I like that idea of having him represented too. The only other representation we have of Saint Joseph is over here, this picture, which shows Saint Joseph and the baby Jesus. When I'm over here, I like to show people the picture of the aerial view, because you can see it looks like what a Catholic would call a monstrance. That's what this is about.
The reason there are what looks like sidewalks shooting out into the grounds around the monument would represent the center of the monstrance. And then the sidewalks coming out, eventually with walls of glass blocks, represent the rays coming out from the sun. Because the monstrance, especially the old-fashioned monstrances, were always in the shape of the sun because the host was the Son of God. I was driving to Corpus Christi. There was going to be a rescue at one of the abortion clinics there. And as I was driving someplace outside of Pleasanton, I saw, but interiorly, certainly not with my eyes, I saw a platter being handed to me, and on the platter was the outline of the monstrance. And I heard inside, will you build the monument? I found it quite disturbing because it seemed like somehow I understood that was the voice of Jesus. And it's like, I kept on driving and I was praying as I drove, and finally said, well, okay, I'll agree, but I've got to think about this some more and pray about it some more. And so went on to the rescue movement in Corpus Christi and came home, and then over the next probably months, I would think about it, and eventually made the sketch, because I still didn't know if it was just my imagination or if it was for real. Sometime later, I don't know how much time went by, one of my friends' mother passed. I came to the funeral, and at the very end of it, I was walking to the door, going home. Gil came running after me and offered to do the drawings. She's an architectural designer.
Eventually, then I knew it wasn't going to happen if I didn't live in Flatonia. So I moved here because my mother's parents had purchased the land that this is on. Then eventually built the house and moved out here and got this started.
Okay, if you look at the drawing, you'll see that there's going to be a building on the north and the south side of the monument, but outside of the circle. And those will be retreat houses. And then there will be, at the top of the circle of the monstrance, you'll see a cross, and that'll be a very small, simple house. We just refer to it as a chaplain's house. And the reason we have that planned is because when we finally have the long walls of glass blocks outside, there will eventually be thousands and thousands of glass blocks. Well, for many parents, when they come to see their baby's block, it gets to be a very emotional moment. And so we wanted to be able to have somebody on the property that could be available to give them comfort.
This was never planned. This cross out here, my plans was on these long walls. These would be long walls of glass blocks coming out here. And when somebody made a donation to Raphael's Refuge, if it was $500 or over, we put their name on this larger block. And they were going on these long walls. In each section, there'd be a cross made out of the big blocks. So they'd be these 4x4, but in a section, they would be in the center, a block of the 8x8s. Well, the architect said, well, that's not going to work, because you can't have them. They'd have to be too high, and practicality erased that. So I needed to do something with those blocks. So that's how we ended up with this cross out here. It's intentional that there's no blocks going across because the winds get so high up here. And it's really turned out, I'm very glad for it. It makes such a nice entrance. And the benches around it come in handy, especially when they have children.
Originally, these were not the pews we had. We had some pews that had been in the Baptist church in Hallettsville. And the church was sold. Through the grace of God, we were able to get the benches that they had left. And so for years, that's what we had out here. All of the pews and benches you see out here now were designed and built by Ken Andrews. He lives in Praha. If you care to step behind the mural, I'll show you what we call our sacristy area. We have pictures out here. We have a lot of pamphlets. That's what they're there for, to take anything they want. We encourage it. We also have the sign-in sheet. If you want a baby block, you can go ahead and take a sheet and fill it out and mail it to us. That's just one way of doing it. At the bottom here, there's forms to be filled out for the mailing list. Also, for baby blocks, a lot of people come out, see the blocks, and think of someone they want to get a block for, not necessarily their own baby even. And so we've got the sheets here that you can fill out and just mail to us, or you can just put them in the donation drawer, which is by the front door as you come in. On one of the shelves, there's 2 directories actually, so you can find your baby if you can't remember or find your baby or somebody else's. You can look up under the baby's name or under the donor's name. But many people ask us why we have A, B, C on the sections between the glass blocks. And that's so that the people who have a baby block out here can locate it. So they can go to like A31. They can go to the section that has the A on it and find their baby's block. Okay, on the top of those shelves, there are several things of potential interest. A copy of just typed out copy of the Book of Tobit. We also have Bibles here. Those are for people to use. Okay, we have information about the summer solstice. As you probably remember, I said the sun comes through the cupola windows. Well, when the sun comes from due east, the opening in the ceiling, and then on to various things on the mural. The most dramatic of which is, for me, is when it hits the dove. We've got a stack of papers about vaccines. It shows you a vaccine without aborted baby cells being used to develop it, and on the other side it shows you which ones did not use that. There's also a stack of papers about where pregnancy health centers are in the up to 100-mile area, and those things you're most welcome to take. Okay, over here on the right, there's a room that we refer to as a counseling room. It gets used for various things, but the idea is that if somebody comes and needs to have counseling out here, we have a private place that we can do that. We can provide that. As you leave the monument, if you go to your left, you'll see where we're establishing a burial ground for babies who have died. It'll be for babies from conception up to and including 20 weeks, or else less than 350 grams.
Thank you for coming on this tour of Raphael's Refuge. You are always welcome here. Have a blessed day.